Tonight is already B'dikas Chometz, the last opportunity we have before the days of Pesach to deal with Hilchos HaChag. During Chol HaMoed I will be giving many shiurim, but before Pesach, last opportunity, and today we will briefly discuss the mitzvah of Achilas Maror. I'm not feeling very great, so the shiur will be somewhat shorter than it usually is. And the topic is not Sibiatzis Masayim or Achilas Matzah, but rather Achilas Maror. Maror originally is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Al matzah semroidim yochluhu bizman hazeh, when there is no korban Pesach, Maror d'Rabbanon. And Maror has some unique halachas. Psochim kuf tezvav midbeis. Bola matzah yotzo, bola maror lo yotzo. When you eat matzah, the definition, the halachic definition of eating is swallowing. The process of chewing is not an integral part of Maisa Achila by its halachic definition. So if you swallow matzah, you are even if you didn't chew the matzah. Well, obviously you can't swallow a big chunk of matzah without chewing it, but the matzah could be soft, like safari matzahs. You don't need to chew matzah to be yaitza. However, regarding maror, you need to chew. And that is because if you're not going to chew the maror, you're not going to feel the bitter taste. And the Rashbam explains, B'hochi koped rachmona limarer et piv shelo oichel zeicha levi maror es chayayim. When you eat maror, it's not enough to eat like all the other mitzvahs sheba achila. You need to feel the bitter taste, otherwise you aren't yaitza. Zeicher levi maror es chayayim. At other opportunities, I dealt with the question, and how do Chazal know why we eat maror? The Torah doesn't say why. Lo darshinan tamed dikra, but that is a separate discussion we dealt with at great length. In the new edition of Minchas Osher, Pashas Chukas, there's a lengthy discussion generally about Tamei HaMitzvot and what are their halachic bearing, halachic significance. But that is not the focus of our shiur today. Anyway, when you eat maror, you need to taste and feel the bitterness. Zeicher levi mararu es chayayim. And this brings us to a major argument of the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish Orchaim Semakuf Chov Daled Ledaf Lametet. Psochim Lametet is the Mishnah of Chameshes Minei Maror. And Semakuf Chov Daled Chazon Ish is Chedushim HaMesechet Psochim Lefi Seider Adapim. And the Chazon Ish makes an argument. The Yerushalmi says in Psochim Yud Ches that chasa, what the Mishnah calls chazeret, the Gemara calls chasa, and that is what we know as chasa, which is lettuce. What we call chazeret, which is horseradish, in the lashon of the Mishnah, is tamcha. So the Gemara says in Bavli, why is mitzvah bechazeret? Because there's a remes chas rachmon alon, and also because chazeret is tchilosoi rach v'soifei kosher, and so are the mitzrim. The lashon of the Yerushalmi Psochim Yud Ches is tchilosei mosek v'soifei mar. So the Meforshim of the Yerushalmi and the Chazon Ish as well, their interpretation is when chasa starts to grow, it's actually sweet and not bitter, and only if you leave it on the ground, mechubel karka, much more or much later than you would usually cut it off, only then does it really become bitter. So the Chazon Ish argues you can't be yaitza with young chasa. It is only if you leave the chasa on the fields for an extended period of time, only then does it really become bitter. So when I was young, I remember they used to sell Chazon Ish chasa. It was, it looked bad. It looked like, it was obvious that it's old. But it really was extremely bitter. So according to the Chazon Ish, you can't be yaitza with young chasa. Only soifoi mar tchilosei mosoik. A contemporary of the Chazon Ish, who was the Ridvaz, was the Rav of Tzvas, comes up with the same argument. And the Ridvaz has a perush on Yerushalmi, not on Psochim, but rather Brochas Mem Gimel, same argument of the Ridvaz. So according to their opinion, you're not yaitza with the chasa that people usually buy in the stores before Pesach. It is only soifoi mar. So that's the opinion of the Chazon Ish. And when I was young, I remember a few years I bought Chazon Ish Chasa. It really was very bitter. And then I stopped. And in today's shir, you will understand why I stopped at that minhag. And the recent years, I haven't been seeing this type of chasa being sold and distributed. I don't know why. So let me explain. So first of all, regarding the chumah of the Chazon Ish. One of the fundamental halachic arguments which I use quite often, and my talmidim are familiar with this argument, is a halacha that is commonplace, almost day to day, and it's nogea l'rabim, and if the poskim don't talk about it, that proves there cannot be such a halacha. And the Chazon Ish himself, in a similar question, writes in Shvi'ah Siman Zayin, if this would actually be halacha, then all the gedolim would teach us this halacha. And if they don't teach us, then this halacha is not existent. Vezu etzli ha'achroa ha'yesera mekol harayot. To me, this is the greatest proof. And my question is, the Mishnah talks about chazeres, which is chasa. Mishnah, Gemara, Rambam, Tur, Shulchan Aruch. Nobody teaches us this halacha. La'afrusha mi'isura. Don't make a mistake. You can't be yotze with most of the chasa that people eat. You need old chasa, which is bitter. So, Mishnah and Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, Ramban, Rash, Borit, Varan, and all the other Rishonim, nobody says a word. The Rambam, including Magad, Mishnah Kesef, Mishnah Lecha, Mishnah, nobody has anything to say. The Tur, including Beis Yosef, Bach, Prisha, Shulchan Aruch, Taz, Magen Avraham. Up to the Chazon Ish, it took 2,000 years for someone to tell us you cannot be yotze with stam chasa, only chasa that was left mechubel karka for a lengthy period of time. So maybe the Chazon Ish would say it's so pushit, it's so simple, nobody needs to say it. It's got to be maror. I understand that, but still, to me, it is very unreasonable. So the Yishalmi says Tchilos Mosig v'Soifer Mar. The Gemara in Bavli Lametes says mitzvah b'chazeres. Rashi's understanding is chazeres is preferable. Mitzvah lechatchila b'chazeres, even though the Mishnah says 5 different types of maror. Chazeres, ulshin, tamcha, charchavina, maror. But chazeres tops the list. And why is that? According to Rashi, because of the Ramozim. Chas rachmon alan, tchilos erach, v'soifei kosher. The Rambam doesn't bring this halacha mitzvah b'chazeres. And it is a wonder because in the Gemara nobody disagrees. Why does the Rambam omit and ignore this halacha? So the Beis Yosef has a very original pshat in the Rambam. And the Beis Yosef explains, according to the Rambam, chazeres is not preferable to the other types of maror. When the Gemara says mitzvah b'chazeres, the kavanah is mitzvah nami b'chazeres. Chazeres is not inferior. Chazeres is not a b'diavad. We would have a haviyam in it that chazeres is b'diavad because it's mosaik and it's not mar. Kamash malan, just as good as the others. And why? Chas rachmana alan. So, if the Rambam writes 5 mina maror, and he doesn't write any of them are b'diavad, then that includes mitzvah b'chazeres, because mitzvah b'chazeres doesn't mean chazeres is preferable, but rather it's not a b'diavad. And if the Rambam writes a yotze with 5 different types of maror, and one of them is chazeres, then there's no need to write mitzvah nami b'chazeres. That's the Beis Yosef interpretation of the Rambam. However, the Levush, following the footsteps of the Beis Yosef, and just when I give a shir, I like to share with my talmidim some just interesting anecdotes and facts. So the Levush was younger than the Beis Yosef. He's a Talmud of the Maror Mordechai Yafa, and he writes in his introduction what brought him to write his sefer. So he says the Beis Yosef came out, and it's amazing, but it's too long, too lengthy. The Beis Yosef starts with the sugi of the Gemara, going through all the Rishonim, and the Levush writes, I felt that there's a need for a more concise and precise and shorter version in halacha. And then, before he finished his monumental work, the Shulchan Aruch came out, and the Levush was once again, taken aback, And then he writes, but the Shulchan Aruch is too short. B'si Yosef is too long, Shulchan Aruch is too short. So we find his niche somewhere in the middle. And that is exactly what the Levush is. He doesn't bring all the poskim like the B'si Yosef, but he's more elaborate and then the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is Piskei Halacha, and the Levush is also interpretation and commentary and a lot of Svaras. So anyway, so Levush follows in the footsteps of the B'si Yosef, but he adds on a few words. Mitzvah nami bechazeres. Havi amina chazeres is a b'diavad because mosig ve'enoi mar kol kach kishar haminim. It's not as bitter as the others. And it is clear from the Levush, chasa is bitter. Every chasa is bitter. However, the bitter taste is not as obvious and not as pronounced as the other minim. Enoi mar kol kach kishar haminim. And I tried this many times. When you really hold the chasa in your mouth and you chew it well, you definitely feel a bitter taste. The fundamental taste of chasa, of lettuce, is bitter. I think people are not aware that it's bitter because we are used to eating tamcha, horseradish, and that burns and that's spicy. It's sharp. But charifas and merirus are not the same. So the Levush saying the same as the B'si Yosef, but he doesn't say mosig ve'enoi mar kol kach kishar haminim. And this goes against Shulchan Aruch Harav, Sif Lamed Tov Ayin Gimel. Shulchan Aruch Harav says enoi mar klal mosig, but I think it is clear the fundamental taste of chasa is mar. Every chasa. Yes, it's true. As it grows older, the chasa, it becomes far more bitter, and the bitterness is far more pronounced, but every chasa is mar. And that is why it is one of Chameshes Minei Maror. V'lo kedivei HaChazon Ish v'Haridvas. Shar Zetshuvas Mishnah Halachas. Chelek Vov Simen Tzadik Ches, Chelek Zayin Simen Samach Beis. The Mishnah Halachas was a Gaon HaGodol and Menashe Klein, one of the Gedolim in America. We had a very special relationship, both on the personal level. He was more than a generation older than I am, but we had a very special relationship, and also with my family, because Hagon Rabbi Menashe Klein, my father, and me as well, we were all Talmidim of the great Kloisenberger Rebbe, so we knew each other since I was a little boy growing up. So Rabbi Menashe Klein wants to be Miyashiv Minhag Olam of the Kash of the Chazon Ish, and he writes, there is no need eating Maror to feel bitterness. You just need to feel the taste of the vegetable that is defined as Maror. Why is it called Maror? Because eventually it's going to become Mar. Even though it's not Mar now, you're still Yotze, but you have to feel the taste of the Yerek Shishmoi Maror. And he wrote this to Moron Reb Chaim Kanievsky. I didn't see Reb Chaim's response, but the Menashe writes in the next Chelek Zayin Samach Beis, I got your kartis, which means your postcard. Even back then, Reb Chaim used to answer very briefly on postcards. And Reb Chaim rejects this interpretation entirely, and he's miyashev, the Taina of the Chazon Ish. I think he quoted the Rashbam. Bonamor lo yotzo bahochi kopil rachmona lamarer piv shelo oichel. So the Rambam clearly explains the Gemara, you need to feel a bitter taste. So my argument is not like Reb Menashe Klein, but on the other hand, chasa is maror. And there is no such a thing that sweet becomes bitter. What is a little bitter could become very bitter. But the fundamental taste of every chasa is a bitter taste. I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a botanist, I'm not a scientist at all. But one of my scientist friends, a nutritionist, told me that this type of lettuce has no sugar at all, and there are very few fruits or vegetables that have no sugar. But I don't take responsibility on that. It's not my field of knowledge or my field of expertise. But all I argue is, if Chazal say, Chas is Maror, then it's Maror. And I tried this many times. When you really think about it and concentrate, chasa is bitter. Every chasa is bitter. Even in Italy, if I had my way, my interpretation, Tchilas Mosek v'Soifer Mar, wouldn't be Tchilas Gedulai and Soif Gedulai, but rather Tchilas Achilosoi and Soif Achilosoi. If you put a piece of chasa into your mouth and you just swallow it, you won't feel the bitter taste. But if you chew it well, and it's in your mouth for just a few seconds, you definitely could feel the bitterness. So on the Yotzes of Shabbos HaGodel, this past Shabbos, what is unique about the Yotzes of Shabbos HaGodel, there's a lengthy halachic discussion from one of the Balei Toises, Rabbi Yosef Toiv Elim, and he goes through from B'dikas Chometz to Achshoras Kelem to all the dinim of the Seder Night. And when it comes to Maror, he writes, Boila kaskusei tuva. You need to chew it well. Chew it well. Why chew it well? You need to chew it, otherwise you won't feel the taste. But like kaskusei tuva. And in Orz Zarua, Hilchas Pesach Reish Non Vav, there is a commentary, a perush, on Rabbi Yosef Toivelim from Reb Shmuel Mepaleza, who was also one of the Balei Toises. And the Orz Zarua quotes him, and pshat is boy lekaskusei tuvi. You need to chew it well to feel the bitterness, to feel the taste. And I really think if you chew it well, you definitely will feel the bitterness. But an interesting question, what I learned from boy lekaskusei tuva is there a hidur mitzvah lechatchela? It should be more bitter, maybe. Zeichel levi Maror was chayim. Not necessarily. You eat maror, you feel a bitter taste. So why does you write boile kaskusei tuva? And maybe that is the chiddush of mitzvah b'chazeres. Einoi mar kol kach kishar aminim. So maybe it would be b'di'eved. Why is it not b'di'eved? Two possibilities. It's not a b'di'eved because as long as you feel a bitter taste, that's enough. And there's no kpeida, no hidur, more bitter, less bitter. Bitter is bitter. Mar is mar. Maror is maror. Or maybe if we would assume that there's a hidur to feel as much bitterness as possible, keneged ze chasrach monalan, tchilos hamusik b'sefer mar remes to the mitzrim, and that, balances out. But my fundamental feeling is maror is maror, mar is mar, bitter is bitter, and there's no difference more bitter or less bitter. And that's why you could be mitzvah for chameshes mina maror. Doesn't really matter which. So as I said, my argument is every chasa is mar. Now, once you eat maror, it really doesn't depend, did you feel a tam mar or not? Because it is impossible to define exactly what a taste is. So how is a Rav supposed to paskin if a person comes to him in the middle of the Seder and he's very disturbed? I ate maror and I'm not sure it was bitter. So we'll ask him, try to describe what you felt. How could one describe a taste? And how are we supposed to relate? I'm not sure it was bitter. You ate chasa? You chewed your chasa? Yotzi yadecha v'asei. There is no Richter scale of bitterness. As long as one eats maror, and maror is bitter. No two people ever taste the same. Taste is entirely individual. One person could eat red pepper as if it was a banana, and the other person would choke and throw up and cough his heart out by eating chili pepper or red pepper or whatever it is, those spicy peppers. No two people ever feel exactly the same taste. And no two vegetables ever have exactly the same taste. The maror sometimes is extremely sharp and sometimes it's not that sharp as all. So when I was young, I remember I used to prepare the maror every year in my house, and I still do. So one year it was so sharp, my eyes burned just by grinding it in the blender. So I asked my late wife before the Seder, a half hour before the Seder, she'd uncover the tamcha, because my minig is I eat chasa and tamcha, lettuce and horseradish. Lettuce because Chazal say mitzvah b'chazeres, that's a hidur. But I also eat tamcha, horseradish, because that's minig of Oisai and the minig of my rabbeim. In Europe, everybody ate tamcha. So we uncovered the grinded horseradish, the tamcha, before the Seder. And when it came to Maror, it wasn't sharp at all. And we calmly ate the kazayas Maror, and my kids were very disappointed. And they said, Tati, this is not Maror, we weren't Yaitza. First time in my life, I actually realized that tamcha, horseradish, chazeres, what we call chazeres, is bitter. It's always so sharp, you don't feel the bitterness. First time I realized it is bitter. So will you ask, did I do it every year? No, I didn't do it every year. Why not? Because the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Gaon. One should not uncover, it should not be meifik tamoy. But the Shoel HaMeshav actually in Chelek Vov Siman Lametes makes this exact observation. And he said tamcha has two distinct tastes. One is sharp and the other is bitter. And the sharper it is, you don't feel how bitter it is. And when the sharpness, the charifus, leaves, then you feel the bitterness. It's more pronounced and more obvious. And so, Ibn d'Italia, if I would have my way, I would say you need to let all the sharpness get out to feel the bitterness. But I don't go against the Mishnah Berurah, I don't go against the Mesoidus of Weiss Yisrael. But I want to come back to my point. There's no way to define exactly how bitter something needs to be, and it's impossible to define, and therefore, Chasa is one of Chameshes Mina Maror. The fundamental time of Chasa is Mar, and Chasa is Mar. Old Chasa is far more bitter than young Chasa, but every Chasa is fundamentally Mar, and therefore Yeyoitze with every Chasa, Kach Nera La'anius Daiti. So this is just a brief synopsis. And if you want to further delve into this sugya, it is in Minchas Osher Moedim Chelek Gimel. I think it's in Siman Yud Aleph. And that's a third volume. Yeah, Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. In Minchas Osher Moedim Chelek Gimel. So Belayla say that we eat matzah and we eat maror. We eat matzah, Zecher LaGeula. Why do we eat maror? Zecher LaAvdos. Rabbi Yankov Emden explains the four kashas. Four kashas boil down to one fundamental question. Four which are one. And the child wants to understand, Father, what are we supposed to remember this magnificent night? Avdus or Cheres? Exile or redemption? Golus or Geula? On one hand, we eat matzah, which is a Zecher LaCherus. We eat maror, which is a Zecher LaAvdus. Matzah itself is a Zecher LaGeula. Lo hisbik b'tzeikam shel avosenu lahachmitz. The other hand, it's lechem oini. Ha-lachma anya da'achla avhatana. We start off the Seder. And our response to our child is, we are supposed to remember both Avdos and Cherus. And why is that? The Zohar Kodesh says, only a slave really appreciates freedom. Person that never knew bondage and never knew slavery, how would he know to appreciate freedom? And only one that was terrorized by the darkness of night would appreciate sunrise. And that is why it is only if we remember Golas that we really will be thankful and appreciative of Geula. But I think it goes far beyond that. Rabbi Kiva ben Yosef taught us, Al kol tzora sheloi tavoi, kol da'ovid rachmona letav ovid. Even when we suffer, we believe Kodesh Baruch Hu loves us, He is with us, and it is all to the better. I heard from my great Rebbe, the Kloiser Maggid Rebbe, why is it when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we lift our hands and cover our eyes? So the source of this halacha is a Gemara in Brochas Yud Gimel. Shulchan Aruch says we don't want to be distracted because kavana is ma'akev pasuk rishon shel Kriyas Shema. But if that is the only reason, you could simply close your eyes or look into your sitter. Lifting your hand, covering your eyes seems to be a symbolic act. What is the message we want to convey? So the great Kloiser Magaremi said, Shem Havaya is Rachamim, Shem Elokim is Midas Adin, as we all know from so many sources. And each and every one of us as an individual, and Klal Yisrael as a nation, we know better days and we know darker days. It's part of life. It's part of the cycle of life, and especially the life of nations, and especially our people, Klal Yisrael, Goyla Achar Goyla. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Kadosh Baruch has two names. Sometimes he appears b'midas harachamim, sometimes b'midas adin. We cover our eyes and we say Hashem Echad. Everything is Havaya, everything is Rachamim. Sometimes it's hard to see, sometimes it's impossible to see, and that is why we cover our eyes. Regardless of what we see, we believe and we try to feel Hashem Echad. Everything is Rachamim. Like the Ramban writes, Pashas v'zoysa brocha miyaminoi eish das lo moi. In this pasuk there's a side, midas adin klula berachamim. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So there's the magnificent story in Agodah Shel Pesach of the greatest and all coming together, b'bnei Barak. And it's a question that everybody asks. Why would they all leave their families, their Talmidim, their yeshivas, and all come to Bnei Barak? And why Bnei Barak? Rabbi Akiva was the youngest of the Chabura. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua were the Rabbeim. Rabbi Akiva was a Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Instead of him going to them, why did they come to him to Bnei Barak? And Rabbi Tarfon was older than Rabbi Akiva. What brought them all to Bnei Barak? My feeling is, and I said this many times, my feeling is it's Teres Emes. Those were the dark days after Churban Habayis. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Klal Yisrael is shattered and broken. And the days of Rabbi Akiva, many still hope that Ben Koziva Bar Kochva will turn the tide. He still was fighting the Romans. And Rabbi Akiva believed he's the Mashiach. And in the days of Rabbi Akiva, the destruction was final. Beitar fell, Matzada fell, Bar Kochva was murdered, killed by the Romans, and a terrible depression descended on the people when they finally realized that this is Churban, and we're going to exile. Everybody was shattered and broken. Whom do you turn to in days of darkness? Rabbi Akiva is the one. His motto was always called the Ovid Rachmon Aletav Ovid. All the Gedolei Hador come to Rabbi Akiva and they want to see how would his Seder look. No Korban Pesach, no Beis Mikdash, dark exile. The dark curtains of exile were drawn. Everybody comes to learn from Rabbi Akiva, to derive chizuk from Rabbi Akiva. He is the great teacher. He always sees Or shebechoshech v'rachamim shebedin. And at the end of Masechet Markos, when they see a Shual Yotzim Avis Kodesh HaKodeshim, and everybody breaks down crying, Rabbi Akiva Metzachek. That is what brought them to Bnei Barak, to see Rabbi Akiva's Seder night. And that is the secret of Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad. So my feeling is we eat matzah to remember redemption. We eat Maror to remember Golos. And then we have Koirech, Matzah v'Maror biyachad, to teach us that matzah and Maror are not really so much different. And we could feel Ta'am matzah in the Maror. My dear friends, exactly 20 years ago, Tavshin Samach Gimel, Beleila Seder, it was the 27th of March. There was a terrible terror attack in the Park Hotel in Netanya in the middle of the Seder night. A bomb exploded. One of the worst terror attacks Israel has ever known. 30 people were killed, 160 were injured in the middle of the Seder. And I spoke the first day of Chol Hamoed to hundreds of people. Nobody asked the question, but it was lingering in the air. It was blowing in the wind. The question didn't need to be asked. Rabbeinu Shalom. People come together to rejoice, to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, to remember Geula. And this is what happens in the middle of the Seder. Devastation, death, destruction, entire families torn asunder. Dam ve'eish ve'timrei soshon in its most horrific form. So when I addressed the people, I told them a story which I read in the Ghetto Kovenot Diary and Shalas Tshuvas Mimamakim. So let me give you a brief introduction to Mimamakim. Rabbi Ephraim Ashri was one of the Gedolim in America, a very, very special Talmud Chacham. And he was the major Talmud Chacham in Ghetto Kovno. There was no official Rav in the ghettos, in those horrible ghettos. But all the shilas came to Rav Ashri. In those circumstances, you didn't really have Svarim. Didn't even have paper. He scribbled his answers as shuvas on scrap paper and buried those pieces of paper under the lampposts of the barbed wire fence, hoping that if he will survive, he will salvage those little pieces of paper and use them as a basis to write lengthy tshuvas, discussing the horrific shilas that he was asked. He survived. And he dug out those little pieces of paper and he printed 5 volumes, Shalas Tshuvas Mimamakim, a masterpiece. So we learned the story of Moshe Goldkorn was the only chassid in the Kovno ghetto. How a chassid got there, I don't know. I don't know the story. So Rav Ashri tells the story. In the middle of the Seder night, there's a knock on the door. And in the ghetto, there was a knock on the door. You were terrified. Walks to the door, petrified, opens the door. And there stands Moshe Goldkorn, bruised, battered, hurt, his mouth oozing blood. And Rabbi Oshi asks Moshe Goldkorn, what happened? And Moshe tells him, I was baking Erev Pesach matzahs because I'm a chassid. And that's our minig every year. And a Nazi caught me. And with his big stick and whip, he almost killed me. He broke my teeth. My mouth is bloody. And I have a question to ask you. And I try to imagine what runs through Rabbi Ashli's mind. Oy vey, what is he going to ask me? Tzaddik v'raloi, Rosha v'toivloi, why do I deserve this? Why? I was just trying to be Mekayim the mitzvahs and the minig of my forefathers. So what did he ask? Moshe Goldkorn asks the rabbi, I never ate shruya because I'm a chassid. But he broke all my teeth. I can't chew. I can't bite. So what should I do? Should I eat shruya first time in my life? Or should I forego mitzvahs matzah? When I read the story and I read the question the first time, I was crying. And I don't know whether you realize I'm emotional right now. And I have difficulty talking. And I say, what carried us through this terrible gullus is not our answers, but maybe our questions. Questions like the Moshe Goldkorn's questions. Kodesh Baruch Hu has his ways, and Moshe Goldkorn didn't question Kodesh Baruch Hu's ways. What troubled him was not, why? Why do I deserve this? Why did this happen? What he wants to know is, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects from me, and what could I do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Should I eat shruya or not? Not always do we have the answers. Sometimes we just cover our eyes and say, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We believe, we try to feel. The questions sometimes are more important than the answers. So whenever I tell the story, are you interested to know what Rabbi Ashri's answer was? I think the question is far more important than any answer. Okay, so the answer was, of course, eat shrio, because it's a mitzvah say the oraisa. Better eat shrio than not eat matzah at all. But the question is far more inspiring than the answer. Not always do we have answers. But that is what Rabbi Kiva taught us. You cover your eyes. Hashem echad. Kol diyovad al-chamon al-ta'avavit. My father told us the story many times. Spending the Leila Seder in Mildorf, in a Nazi labor camp. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe, my great Rebbe, the great Gadol and Tzaddik, was worried a few weeks before Pesach was going to be with matzahs. And people laughed at him. What else do you want besides matzahs? Do you need Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin? Do you need a talis with a big Torah? What else do we expect to get? Forget it, people said. And he said, how will we have a Pesach without matzahs? Miracle of miracles, 2 weeks before Pesach, there was an Allied bombardment. They bombed the train station, and there was a Nazi train there which was torn to shreds. And a huge quantity of wheat was dispersed on the fields. And those decimated Jews coming back from work every day picked up a few kernels of grain and brought them back into the machna, and it was putting your life in jeopardy. A day or two before Pesach, Kloser Magareb and a small group of Mesiras Nefesh, and my father was one of them, took some racks, crushed the grain, had some kemach, some flour out of Pesach, took some water, put on a little fire, and they baked matzahs. There were 11 little matzahs, each one this big. My father was one of them. He got a little matzah. And Belela say that they sat in total darkness on their little matzahs. And the great Kloisenberger Rebbe quoted the entire Agada from his memory, from beginning to end, which very few people could do. Try to imagine the scene. They were in far worse circumstances than Golas Mitzrayim. What we learn in the Torah is, after leaving Mitzrayim, people sometimes long to go back there. Zachanu et ha'avatichim et lama hoitzesonu lahamas oisonu b'midbar. Nobody that was in the Holocaust ever wanted to go back there. No one. No one of the millions. They were in far worse circumstances than our forefathers in Mitzrayim. So what did they have to rejoice about? But that is the Mesiras Nefesh of our people. Always. Anywhere. Everywhere. Dveikus in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like Moshe Goldkorn. Do I eat shruya or don't I eat matzah? Thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, covering your eyes and saying, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's the message of Koirech. Matzah is Geula, Maror is Golos. Koirech teaches that the Golos is a mafteach shel Geula. And even Midas Adin is infused and part of Midas Arachamim. Let us hope that B'Kora B'Yameinu we will see Kvod Hashem B'Idgalya. Not Behester, but Begilui. Ki ayin ba'ayin yir'u b'shuv Hashem tzion v'niglo Kvod Hashem. We should see Chazdei Shemayim Gluyim B'Chesed U'V'Rachamim. And in these glorious days of Geula, B'Nisan Nigalo, B'Nisan Asidin Lagol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send Mashiach Tzidkeinu, V'yivna Lono Beis Mikdashenu V'Sefarteinu V'Sham Neichal, Min HaZvochim U'Min HaPsochim Sheyagia Domam Al Kir HaMizbeach, B'Mheiro v'yomeinu amen. A kusheren freilichen Pesach.